measure stuff is ridiculously fascinating to me. I know, I'm a nerd. It's a thing. We've established this. Let's move on. I mean, think about it. We kind of picked this like arbitrary length out of the air and used it to base all of our other measurements on. Well, most of us do. I mean, come on, America, get your act together. Most early measurements were based on body parts. Things like the cubit, that old-timey biblical measure, were based on the length from the tip of the finger to the elbow, and you can add those together to make things like the stride. I feel like most of you have kind of figured out the main problem with this kind of unit of measurement. Yeah, not everyone's the same size. So it didn't take us very long to realise that we needed some sort of standardised system of measurement, and there were a few attempts. Some better than others. The yardstick was one of the first attempts to get everybody on the same page in terms of measurement, and actually Anglo-Saxon kings were thought to have a yardstick, so something that they kept in the vaults for everybody to base their measurement on, as early as the 10th century. There's a brilliant story about King Henry I deciding to make it the distance between his nose and his thumb, but I feel like unless you've got access to a king, that's probably not super helpful. Other people decided to try and use things that most people had lying around instead of kings. I mean, most people had access to barley, and actually the inch was supposed to be 3 of these lying end to end, and you could add those together to get larger units. In practice though, this wasn't always super helpful. Plus, different countries often had different kind of ways to standardise these measurements. It got so bad that by the 1700s, in France alone, one country, there were over 250,000 different ways to measure stuff. And like, you could go from one village to the next, like literally next door, and the person living next to you would have a completely different way of measuring stuff. Like, this is not great. Although it was kind of a good system for the people that wanted to make money fast. I mean, if you think about it, there were a lot of merchants who were probably, you know, cashing out a little bit and selling what they thought was a certain amount for more than it was worth or less than it was worth. So for years, the powers that be in France, the royal family, kept the situation going. Things kind of started looking up for people in 1789. I mean, not so much for the ruling class in France though. A lot of them couldn't look anywhere because they had no head. Ah! Yes, I'm funny. Shut up. In the 1790s, the Academy of Science in France, the Académie des Sciences, I learnt French in high school, decided that they wanted to standardise measurement. Enough was enough. 250,000 different ways to measure distance and weight is too many. They decided to implement what they called the International System of Units. And yes, that does have an actual name in French. Am I going to try and pronounce it? No. So the French Revolution in some ways was responsible for the metric system. There were a few ideas about how they were going to standardise what they called the metre. The first idea was to use a pendulum, which, if you think about it, makes a certain amount of sense. Like if you pull it back to a certain angle and then let it go and then measure how far it swings, that can be your meter. And every person could make some sort of crude pendulum, right? Like I've made one. It sucks, but it works. Problem was, scientists at this particular point in time were very, very aware that the Earth was round and that gravity was a thing. And so gravity was different depending on where you were in the world. So the pendulum idea, while it seemed like a good one, would end up giving you slightly different results wherever you were in the world. So after a bit of brainstorming, the Academy of Sciences in France sent a couple of astronomers off on a ridiculously crazy and complicated surveying mission. Okay, let's see if I can get this right. Pierre Méchain and Jean-Baptiste Delambre. I'm so concerned about getting their names right, I forgot what year it was. 1792. They left in 1792 on a 6-year journey. Their aim was to measure what's called the meridian. The meridian is basically a quarter of the Earth. So in this case, it was the line between the North Pole and the equator cutting through Paris. The idea was to calculate the distance in linear, one of the 250,000 measures of distance, then divide that by 10 million to get the meter. Thing is, it was impossible to measure the whole thing. I mean, there's a bunch of water in the way, and the first successful trip to the North Pole didn't happen until 1908. So they chose 2 places running through Paris because, well, these guys were French, so why not? Barcelona in the south and Dunkirk in the north. Mainly because these are the 2 places that are closest to sea level. So if they could figure out an accurate distance between the 2, well then they'd be able to extrapolate that, and then they'd be able to get the distance from the North Pole to the equator. Sounds simple, right? Yeah. Kinda. You see, the Earth's surface gets in the way. First of all, our planet is very definitely a sphere, so at a certain point you lose sight of your surveying equipment due to the curvature of the Earth. It's not like you can just point something in a direction and measure a straight line. And to ramp up the difficulty level to nightmare, the Earth isn't like flat all the way around. There are a whole bunch of dips and valleys and mountains in the way. The Earth kind of sucks for surveying. To get around this problem, they used a technique that's actually still a thing today. It's called triangulation. If you know the angle between 2 points and the distance of one side of the triangle, you can work out the rest. Add them all together and you get an accurate distance. It took them 6 years, and I mean they split up into 2 groups as well. So one went north, one went south, and they decided to meet up in the middle later. It probably would have actually taken them less time if it weren't for the ridiculous amount of social upheaval happening at the time. They got arrested multiple times. I mean, think about it. You're in the middle of what's essentially a war and a revolution, and then you've got a couple of people looking super dodgy walking around the countryside with weird instruments. After they got back, and after they had done all their calculations and announced the length of the metre, the Academy of Sciences had a standard bar made up. And it's made out of iridium and platinum so that it would last as many years as possible. Up until about 20 years ago or so though, that platinum and iridium bar was legitimately what we used to base all of our measurements on. They sent a whole bunch of them around the world. Weirdly though, Marchand and Delambre were super wrong about their distance. They actually calculated a distance that was slightly too short. But it was too late. I kind of feel like the powers that be all collectively went, and it was never changed. So the metre, what we use today, is actually still based on a completely wrong measurement. How insane is that? Thanks so much for watching everyone. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button and also the bell next to it so you get notifications of when my ridiculously sporadic updates go online. Yes, you might want to hit that notification bell. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Make sure you give this a like if you enjoyed it. Also, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. There are details down below. There's also a list of resources and extra reading, and you can find other links and things that I am doing on the internet, on my YouTube channel, or on my blog. I think that's all I have to mention. Yes. There's so many social media things at the moment. Some of them I'm active on, some of them I'm not. If you want to get in contact with me, send me a tweet. I think that's pretty much it.